Oklahomans protest mandates on COVID-19 vaccine and masks during Freedom Rally at State Capitol. So last Saturday, they say 1,500. We might say like 500 people showed up at the Oklahoma State Capitol to protest masks and vaccine mandates, two things that are currently basically illegal in the state of Oklahoma. So I'm really not sure what you're protesting, but First Amendment, you're free to do that. But that's what they showed up to do. And Carmen Foreman had some good coverage of it inside there. Several reporters were inside. Our take at the time, which did pretty well, was you see 1,500 idiots and you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But like, just keep it in context. Like when it came to like getting teacher pay raises and education funding, 40,000 people rolled out to the Capitol and stayed there for 2 weeks. So, don't get too bogged down because you can find 1,000 idiots who will rally for COVID. And then the last piece of it, I would say, is like Jackson Lemire and his quest to be the next United States Senator from Oklahoma is terrible at taking event photos because you're supposed to crop these so that the crowd looks like it goes on to infinity and that you're filling the space. And you can clearly see on the right side of this photo where he has nowhere near capacity. And the rotunda has a giant hole in the middle of it. So it's like filling a donut. There's a lot of empty space that people can't stand in. So it's really not a great look. And hilariously, last thing I want to show folks before open the floor here is the Sooner Tea Party, who is kind of the precursor to this latest iteration of right-wing fanatics. They commented that they thought perhaps there were 1/10 the number of people that rally organizers said. So Al Gerhardt, who's a longtime Republican Politico, even he was skeptical of the claims being made by the far right in their rally. So that's always funny when that happens. But yeah, that's what happened last Saturday. In case you missed it.
I guess it's newsworthy that a couple hundred dickheads decide to go to the Capitol and protest some shit that's already illegal, and probably spread COVID more. So, but there is this hopefulness that I got from it in that when you think about the actual broad scheme, and there was Progress I had a great tweet about 1,500 and probably was more closer to 150, right? The number of dickheads that go and protest dumb shit that say go and protest life-saving policies. And it's okay, 40,000 Oklahomans showed up to do something worthwhile and stayed there for days on end to raise teacher pay and get more resources to children. And so I got the hope from it in that we have to remember, and it's easy to forget in a state like Oklahoma, the biggest block of voters in Oklahoma is non-voters by a mile. And a large majority of people in this state aren't engaged politically. And so you have the super loud dickhead caucus, but they're actually not as numerical as we like to think. They're just loud. And so I did get some hope from maybe, with what we're doing, if we get loud enough, we can reach that 95% of the middle who just wants a better life. And what we have to keep in mind is that that 95% of the middle will never be as politically engaged as we are, right? We have to keep in mind that those are the people who just want to have a better life and watch OU football games or, go to shows or movies, whatever, which by the way, the dickheads are keeping them from doing all of those things. And just say, okay, the government can make my life better in this way. Who do I need to vote for to make that happen? What policies do I need to support? Okay, I'm going home. They're not going to spend an hour listening to you and I wax poetically about the dickheads in Oklahoma every Friday. And that's fine. And so we have to keep the perspective of the majority of Oklahomans are not the 7 people who were at the Capitol but are groups of people that we can reach and we can engage enough to make some substantial changes in the state of Oklahoma. Jackson Lemire he probably ain't got but like $19 left, right? So like I don't think he has the funding for like a quality quality individual to edit and copy and paste or do whatever needs to be done with his photos, etc. I don't think he has the funding for that anymore after his. But he's never had like large groups, right? He's never had like the following people thought he did. He's loud. That's all it was. He's loud and obnoxious and asinine, right? So he's gonna go to these events and do those things, but he is even on that side of the aisle is quite irrelevant.
Well, and it's like it's this small right wing echo chamber. I mean, like when they do these big events, I mean, they bring in all the stars, Michael Flynn and Linwood and all these people who have built-in following. So it's like you're just really just shifting the same following around, and the disinformation obviously works, and there is a lot of them. But like, I'm gonna pop up. I moved it around a little bit, but. This is a poll from Data for Progress, kind of a national deal, but it just shows you. Sorry, let me. Everything is like differently screened, so I'm trying to like make sure stuff fits. But it shows you that even amongst Republicans, there's almost 40% that support mandatory masking or require vaccinations for attending K through 12 classes. So, even amongst the Republican Party, you almost have a majority that support that. But then once you get into independents and Democrats, it's like overwhelming support. So it's like not even close. So, we're really catering to this very relatively small group of reactionaries. And even in Oklahoma, and especially in like the urban areas and like certain districts, like they're not even close to a majority. Like they should not be guiding policy. They just shouldn't.
And he is their leader, as it were, and he's not going to win the nomination, right? Like, yes, Langford does some absurd racist bullshit, like going down to the border and ranting about migrants to keep enough of the crazies along with him. But these super crazies and their leader, Lemire, they're not going to win in blood red Oklahoma, right? They're not going to win the nomination. So they're not. And Langford was not there in hailing the Delta variant. So there isn't a huge number of reactionaries hell-bent on death. It's just that
Stitt wasn't there, right? I think that's like telling, right? Probably the guy who's their biggest mouthpiece didn't show up at the rally. Like he didn't even want to bask in it. So, I think that tells you what you need to know.
Freedom Rally, FREEDUMB. It's really a death rally. Again, just statistically, hopefully it wasn't nowhere. It clearly wasn't anywhere near 1,500. But they should hope that for their sake, because statistically, by the way, a global murderous pandemic is still rip-roaring across the state, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of them were not vaccinated. So
you definitely got Delta there. Definitely got some Delta.
For their sake, I hope that it's a lot less than 1,500. And I don't want anyone to catch COVID, obviously, but we'd be hard pressed to not know that was a super spreader event, as was the rally in June of 2020 in Tulsa. So they seem to be huge fans of super spreader events.
And I popped up that KOCO article just as like the headline for it, but I don't recommend watching the video because they just regurgitate their talking points. My deal is if you're going to cover a rally like that, it's extremely dangerous to just go and say, do you think you know what you're talking about? Because of course they're going to say, yes, I know what I'm talking about. If you're going to do that, you need to put right next to it a medical provider or somebody who is in the field doing this work saying this would absolutely constitute, because they asked the one guy, do you think are you worried this is going to be a super spreader event? And he of course says no, and they try to cut him off, but then they tailed the audio and he's like, plandemic and all this other shit, and it's well, that's bad. he's obviously a conspiracy theorist. He obviously doesn't know what he's talking about. You didn't mention any credentials that he would have to possibly know what he's talking about other than having a strong opinion. So if you're going to cover stuff like that, you really need to take the extra 10 fucking seconds to like put a doctor in there to be like, yes, standing shoulder to shoulder indoors right now, unvaccinated, is incredibly stupid and dangerous, and you're going to end up putting, out of 1,000 people, you're going to put X number in the hospital. But instead, we give these guys their platform and let them regurgitate their crap.